This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
I was also angry, if I can say, at God, because here I had this beautiful child, Robert, and he did not come with any books to care for him. It's like, he's so different than the rest of them. I don't know what I'm doing. So I had a period I was angry at God. And if anyone's out there of your listeners that hears that, it seems foreign to people, and you'd say, I believe in God, but I was angry. And it's okay to be angry.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. I'm talking with special needs advocate Juli Henderson about her caregiving story and how she's sharing what she's learned with other caregivers. Whether you are a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode of The Heart of Hospice is sponsored by Odonata Care. When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
If I could only choose one word to describe today's interview, today's episode, I would say beautiful. My guest has a beautiful spirit, and you're going to hear some amazing, amazing things. Juli Henderson is my guest today. She is a special needs advocate, a public speaker, a vocal instructor, and the owner of JH Voice Studio. She's also the founder of the blog In Our Arms, which is a passion project that she launched in 2021. She shares the story of her late son, Robert. As a mother of a child with a rare mitochondrial disease who passed away at the age of 18, Henderson's writing gives hope to thousands of readers. Juli founded a private Facebook group in 2021 where individuals, families, caregivers, and clinicians even share resources and find support. She's also got over 20 years of experience serving military families and underserved communities, highlighting the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion for all people. She's received numerous awards for the work that she's doing as a community leader. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in vocal performance. So, Juli Henderson, this beautiful woman who is my guest today, she's going to be telling you the story of her son Robert and his life-limiting illness and how his life impacted her and her family. So I want to warn you up front that this story can be very difficult to hear. It involves the death of a young person. Robert was 18 when he passed away. And it is a very intense story. You're going to hear that on Juli's side and in my response as well. So if you feel like this isn't a story for you to listen to, or maybe not a story for you today, feel free to disconnect. Connect back with us another time for another interview, and just take care of yourself while you listen if you choose to stay with me. Juli's going to be describing the emotional challenges she had during her caregiving experience, including fear and denial. She's very authentic, very vulnerable in what she shares about the challenges of her caregiving experience. Her son Robert had been receiving palliative care for 10 years, but he was never on hospice. And Juli's going to explain the story behind the decisions And I want to clarify that I didn't have Juli on the show today to be a cautionary tale that here's what you should have done or you should have been on hospice. The lessons inside Juli and Robert's and Chris's story that you're going to hear are related to advocacy and choice and making decisions with the information you have in the best interest of your loved one at the time and space you're in right then. And that's what Juli and her husband did. She's got some wise words to share with caregivers. So sit back and listen. Maybe have some Kleenex ready. I certainly needed some. There were tears that flowed on both sides today. I hope you hear and see the beauty in Juli Henderson's story. Juli, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice.
Thank you for having me.
We are already kindred souls. We can already tell because we've been talking about our grandbabies and sharing our little grandma quirks and craziness. And what is your grandmother name? Remind me.
Coco. It's very special, Coco.
I love that one. I love that one. So does it have some kind of meaning behind it, or did you just decide it sounded good?
No, I was thinking maybe he could say the C sound, pretty quickly. So I needed to get a hard consonant, maybe so he could go Coco first before anybody else. It's pretty selfish, honestly, but it worked. So.
I like it. I like that. I like the way you think. I went old school. I am grandma. And you were right. Grandma is not the name to start with because everybody else got pushed to the front. But I did that on purpose because my daughters threatened to teach their kids a lot of crazy grandparent names for me. Pepe, Popo, Pee, Wawa. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just come up with my own. Thank you very much.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think they were teasing, but I could see them actually being kind of serious about it. So I wanted to get ahead of that need.
Yeah, don't trust them.
Yeah, not for a second. So just so the audience can get to know you a little bit, would you describe yourself as an extrovert or an introvert or somewhere in between?
My husband would say I'm an extrovert. I think I'm somewhere in between. But because I'm a voice teacher, I think I come off as someone who is always, embracing people and always willing to talk. But I love the conversation when I really get to listen to people and hear their stories. So I don't know if that necessarily is an introvert, but it's a listener. But yeah, I love life and I love what I get to do. So I guess most people would probably say I'm an extrovert.
I think the world needs some of both.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I've already introduced you to the audience and we've gotten to know each other a little bit. We've been talking, but you have a special story and I want to meet somebody else and I want the audience to get to know him. Tell me about your son, Robert.
Well, Robert was the joy of our life. And he was, I'll say was, so everybody will understand where we are in this conversation, but he was the bottom of 5 kids. So my husband and I, Chris, we love kids. So we had lots. And then the last 2 were twins. And so Robert kind of snuck in there because there aren't really twins in our family at all. And he came and he and Victoria, his twin sister, were developing pretty much the same until about 2 years old. He needed a little bit of speech therapy. He was a little bit behind her speech-wise, and she was really ahead. And so there was quite a contrast there. And so developmentally, we said, okay, let's get some speech therapy. We started all of that. And then at 2.5, I was in my car headed down the highway to go get some groceries with the twins in the back seat. And I heard Victoria make a noise. And I looked in the rearview mirror and Robert was having a generalized grand mal seizure. And I'd never seen her seizure before. Maybe on a movie, I could say I saw something in passing, but it was so unusual for me to see my son. I tell my voice students clicking his body like a metronome, like it was in rhythm. to some other rhythm that I'd never seen before, eyes and arms and legs moving. So pulled the car over, obviously, and got someone to pull over next to me to call 911. And that was really the beginning for me of a journey with Robert and our whole family, a journey with Robert that took a lot of turns. I can tell you that in the midst of all those turns and challenges for the 18 years that he was a part of our lives and we were blessed to care for him, there were a lot of joys too. So it's not just, hundreds of seizures a day. It was also the fact that he loved life. I mean, he loved music. And so we're a musical family. And so he would rock his wheelchair when he had to be in a wheelchair to any song, especially Taylor Swift. And he was a joy. He knew how to give the best hugs of anyone we know. He knew how to look you straight in the eye, like he was looking right through you. And it was a gift he had. He knew how to look at people and love them. And so for us, as he progressed from, that first seizure of not knowing what that was, and then learning that he had a very rare mitochondrial disease. It has a component it's called a CHD2 component. And so he was really rare within his disorder. And so there weren't a lot of people around for me to talk to about his disorder. We just learned as we went along from his physicians and his nurses and his therapists about how special he was. So he had full care in the house, and I got to be here with him every day. So if you say, Robert had a very rare disability and he was, medically fragile and medically complex, that would be true. But the other side of that was he was hilarious. I mean, and he had no concept, even at 18 when he passed. He was really, 2.5, 3-year-olds mentally, but developmentally, he just kind of stayed at 2.5 and 3. And, we know 2.5 and 3 can be, a hard age for a child, or it could also be hilarious. And so he was that child who would, just enjoy movies with us and enjoy being hugged, and enjoy life itself, even in the limited life that he knew he was loved.
I love it. So you write in your blog, no education or experience had prepared me for this. And you were talking about this initial seizure that Robert had in the car. You said no warning or encouragement had foretold of this moment. Becoming a caregiver for somebody with a life-limiting, life-threatening illness, the way you did, it's an intense event. It's monumental. It truly changes who you are. What words would you describe what it was like for you to become a caregiver for Robert like that?
Lonely. And I'll even say devastating, because that initial introduction to caregiving for anybody is devastating, because it is life-altering, especially with a child that is medically complex. It's scary. It can make you be a little angrier than you've ever thought you could possibly be in your life. I think when I think about the initial reaction, it was saddened and frustrated and I'll say ignorant, because I had not known anyone ever to have a rare disease. So I did a lot of Googling, which I would not suggest. Don't deep dive too much.
Right.
But you do that initially. I think the fear part of it also will drive someone to put like a suit of armor on. I say it's like almost like I became Wonder Woman. Like I was afraid of what this would mean for him. And as his mother, I was like determined to be Superwoman, Wonder Woman, with a big old cape, because initially you can't imagine that you'd allow anything to touch your child. Like, this can't be true. Denial was very much a part of it when we started going down the road after realizing, it wasn't just going to be one seizure, that he had had seizures since, he was born. So there were things that, I just felt like I needed to learn, and it can be a lonely road if you don't know where to turn. because there's not another child in your neighborhood, maybe in your city, maybe in your state, who has such a rare condition. So, yeah, all those words put together.
All the things. Yeah.
All the things.
Caregiving somehow by nature is isolating, and yet there are 55 million plus unpaid family caregivers across the United States.
Yes.
And yet,
isn't that an incredible statistic?
It is. And many of them taking care of their parents and their children at the same time, many of them working at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very isolating experience. Yes. But what I would say to listeners is every word that you might hear Julie use to describe the caregiving experience, that's real and that's okay. Completely okay to feel all of those emotions, all of them.
Yes.
So how did your caregiving experience that lasted 18 years with Robert, and you have other children that were older as well, so you were raising a family, how did your caregiving experience change who you were personally as an individual?
It's such a good question, because I actually tell my boy students that when they meet me for the first lesson that I'm not the person I was maybe 15 years ago. And so it's before Robert and after Robert. Now we have 5 kids, so raising children was, my joy, but none of them had any of the disabilities that Robert had in any way. So it was new to me, and it changed me in a lot of ways. If I can say, I was probably always a glass half full person before Robert. And, the twins were a joy. The last 2 were twins. And so it was such a joy to have twins. But everything to me changed when I realized I know nothing about caring for this child. I felt like I could be a pretty good wife. I could be a pretty good mom. And I loved my job as a mom, and I loved my job as a voice teacher, but this was totally different. It was almost like living on another planet, because I knew none of the tools to take care of him. I didn't have those tools. So I learned that even though my husband's a physician, we couldn't fix him. So the fixing stopped pretty early, because Robert's disease was obviously a genetic condition that was not going to be fixed. It was going to be managed, and we could keep him safe in from certain things. But as far as me changing, there were some days, to be real honest with you, Helen, I didn't recognize myself. Like when I mentioned anger, I think that's the thing that a lot of people who are caregivers do not talk about, that you can suddenly find a place in your life that you're angry just because it can be multiple reasons. For me, it was because I didn't know what I was doing. Sometimes in the beginning, I didn't know how to care for him well. I didn't know how to take care of hundreds of seizures a day. I didn't know what medications were going to work that day. I didn't know where we were going to need to get medications from, if it was Canada or US, or where are the meds that were going to help him. So I was angry about that. I was also angry, if I can say, at God, because here I had this beautiful child, Robert, and he did not come with any books to care for him. It's like, he's so different than the rest of them. I don't know what I'm doing. So I had a period I was angry at God. And if everyone's out there of your listeners that hears that, it seems foreign to people when you'd say, I believe in God, but I was angry. And it's okay to be angry. You're going to be angry. It's part of the mourning process. You just don't realize you're mourning as you go on the journey. So I do wholeheartedly believe that we mourn the little things as we're going. And I tried to let myself mourn those things and let go of those things that I had held on to for Robert, that he was going to, be able to walk in school, that he was not going to be on a wheelchair, that he would, not need a G tube, that he would not need brain surgery, that we'd not need 23 meds and supplements a day. When the reality came, I had to look at myself and literally say, you need to grow up. You need to get a clue that this is so much about Robert. So everything that's about Robert is also about you and who you are as a mom and how you treat him as a human being. that yes, he has a disability, but he's Robert. I mean, this is how he came to us in our arms. If I can say that, he's in our arms. We get the joy of raising him in whatever condition he's in. And I'll have to tell you, he passed away in my arms on February 15th. And so there were so many things that I had to learn. I can still keep my glass full, if I can say it that way, because once I came to a place after many years of realizing how special he was, I realized I get the joy of raising Robert. You know, I was given him. He's so special and so unique. I got the joy of caring for someone that was so different, that changed me into being less selfish. I think I would have been a spoiled brat. My life would have been about me. And my life became, boy, I'm going to say this and I might cry. My life became about Robert and what a gift he was. And I couldn't have taught myself that, and I could not have taught my kids that. I still say to moms who are raising other kids in the family, that when your other children, the sibling of your special needs child, become adults, they are the most compassionate, loving adults because they've already lived it in your house. They already know how to be inclusive. They already know how to love someone that's different than them. They might have their anger and they might have their mourning also, but they're special adults because they've already watched it. And I'm not that smart to teach my kids that. They learned that from Robert.
I love your honesty and your authenticity. You see the beauty, and yet you're still able to acknowledge there was a lot of crap that happened along the way.
A lot of crap. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Right, because we can't act like it was easy. It was a loss. I want to touch back on something you said about mourning. Mourning, and you were mourning while Robert was still with you.
Yeah.
Right, while you were caring for him. That's anticipatory grief.
Yes.
Because there are little pieces, dreams that have fallen away, the thought of him choosing a career, having a partner, maybe having children, all of those things, because his life was not going to look like the dreams and ambitions and expectations you had for him.
Yes, absolutely. And I try to, when I have the chance to be really, really honest about it, the other part of that is that Robert was a twin. So here I have sweet Victoria, who is joined at the, not literally at the hip, but that's her baby brother, 3 minutes younger,
right,
who she is, absolutely in love with. And so not only was I watching Robert carefully, I was also watching Victoria carefully. And she doesn't mind me saying that because she knows I share about her story too. But there was that. And so we as a family had to mourn and the letting go. And I didn't know what that was at first. I remember the first time I felt just something inside of me, like, what is this feeling? It's not sadness, but it's deeper than sadness. And I could not figure out what it was. And I realized what I was sad about was something I was losing. It wasn't as far along as him having a partner, having a child. It was more so like there's a loss of him not being able to be smart like the other kids. All the other kids are very smart. So for me, it was the academics that, we've gone to take a test now for him that says he is, now we say intellectually, and we don't say MR anymore. So we
right,
say IDD. So back then it was MR. So when I went to the, pediatric developmental specialist and he got the, I'll say, grade of MR, I went crying back to his school, to his teacher, who I adore. And I just said, wait a second, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen. I'm mourning this loss of this intelligence for my elementary school child. And she looked at me, love her to death, said, Julie, this is the best thing that could happen to him, because in this situation, this is who Robert is. This is what you need to get, Mom, that this is who he is. And this labeling that you're calling it on his life only allows you later on to care for him the way he needs to be cared for. Because I was still trying to fix it, and hoping he's going to grow out of it. Well, we were way past that at that point. And there was this deep something's wrong. I feel something. What is it? And then I learned, oh, it's morning. I just lost that hope of mine that he would not lose mental capacity because of all of his seizures. So that was the beginning of it. And then as it went on, I realized, oh, when I have that feeling of something feels deeper than a sadness, it's a mourning, it's a loss, it's a death of something. Even though I could be holding in my arms, there was that death. And so I think it's really important that we try to encourage people, and I try to encourage people when they have that feeling and it feels like a loss and it's a death, to acknowledge, yeah, that really is, that's grief, that you lost something and you need to just sit there for a minute. And if it takes a day, if it takes hours, if it takes 3 weeks for you to sit there and just have all the feels until you're ready to acknowledge that, okay, yeah, that I let that go.
Yeah.
It's really important.
So many hard lessons that come inside caregiving, intense caregiving experiences like this, especially for a prolonged period of time. And it has a tendency to sneak up on you, but when it hits you, wham.
Mm.
And I get what you're saying about the labels, because that's one of the things I absolutely hate. And I think the healthcare system, the industry that we are supposed to be getting our healthcare from, compassion versus compliance, I think those things are at odds, and the system uses labels to make it easier for us to figure out what people's care should be like. But these are human beings. They're not numbers. They're not strictly patients. I've become to think of the word patient as a label.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's easier for us to shuffle people around and silo them out to where they need to be when we do that. But those labels, we need to remember that for caregivers and for patients, those labels are incredibly hurtful. They're dehumanizing, and they say a lot about who we are as healthcare providers and about our caregivers and our patients.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it even carries over, like in my life, in my profession, with music, because one of the things I tell my students when we say the word retard, RIT period, for retardando,
yes,
it's the slowing down. And so when people say the word, that person is, I'll say it, and please know that I don't mean this or ever use this word, but when you call someone retarded, and then I have to look at a piece of music and say retardando, and it's, it's the same. It hits me a different way. That's one of the things after having Robert. I never thought of it in music in any way prior to raising Robert, but it's an offensive word almost to me when a song slows down and says RIT. It's like, no, can we find something else? But it crosses over in so many areas in our lives that we don't realize. So yes, labels. I get, obviously because of my husband, there have to be, things that we categorize in people's lives so they can get the care they want. But some of those things need to be reevaluated.
Yes. And how we use them.
Yes.
When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire, with over 40 years of combined hospice experience. The Care Plan is your trusted companion, a wealth of knowledge from clinicians who understand the unique challenges of hospice care. Nancy and Brenda provide practical insights in their book, along with a library of guided videos that offer caregiving tips and techniques to make caregiving easier and simpler. The Care Plan isn't just a book, it's a source of strength for those who navigate the challenges of caregiving, ensuring that every moment is embraced with compassion and care. The goal of Odonata Care is to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Don't forget that the Care Plan is also available in Spanish. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
You talked about Victoria, Robert's twin, and this disparity between her abilities and his that apparently, I would think, became much more obvious as she grew and developed, and he began to lag behind with his health problems. How did Robert's illness and the caregiving experience that you were all having at that point, how did that change your family dynamics?
There were periods in and out that we addressed it, and other times we didn't address it. I'm not saying that I was the greatest mom on planet Earth. It was, I tried to pay attention to each one of them. So sometimes I did it well, Helen. Sometimes I didn't do it well. In the midst of Chris's military physician responsibilities, he was deployed 3 times for 9 months while Robert was with us. So, I look back on it now and say, how did we get through it? I don't know. I also know it's the grace of God, but also the kids are amazing. And of course, I'm partial because, I love my babies, but they were so helpful. There were other times when they were angry. They didn't always get to be the child that got to have the parties at the house because we had a hospital bed in our living room, Right. They didn't get to go to all the parties. They didn't get to go to I didn't get to go to all of their sporting events. I tried to take Robert to some of them. There's other times I would have a caregiver. I could go by myself, especially when Chris was deployed. It was not easy, but we say we circled around Robert. He was in the middle of everything we did, even when Chris was deployed. It became really important that, I slept. Before we had nursing, there wasn't a lot of time to sleep at night because he had massive seizures at night also. Baby monitors work really well, by the way, moms. They're a good thing to have. But I had some of our kids, be on nighttime watch so that I could sleep. And that was a blessing. Our kids are very much aware of the toll it took on me, but I'm also aware of how it changed their lives. And when they became adults, they all graduated from college. I said to them, hey, I'm writing in the blog about Robert's siblings. I really need to know, did you guys ever feel neglected or that I didn't do enough for you? And as a mom, and you can understand, there was that lingering, Robert's gone, but did I pay attention to the other kids enough? Did they get what they needed? And every one of them, Helen, said, no, we knew exactly what you were doing, and we're not the less for it. That was probably the most important thing that my kids could have said to me, that we knew what you're doing. It changed all of us for the good and for the, I won't say bad, but it changed all of us in a way that was different from other families. But that for me, it was like, okay, I did what I could for Robert, and they recognized what I was doing, that I couldn't do everything. That's how we changed. I think prior to Robert, everything was about all the kids instead of just really about one. Trying to keep him alive was our goal for as long as we would get to have him. His disease probably should have taken him 2.5 to 3. But we got him for 18 years. That was incredible for us and for his medical staff that we had him that long. So I'd count that as, we had the resources, but we also had great physicians that taught us a lot how to do that. So I don't think our family is just an isolated, we did it so well just as a family. No, we had a whole team, a village of people that helped us, from churches to neighbors to medical staff to we were blessed in that way. Robert was blessed in that way.
Yeah, it's amazing that your kids can look back and say, we saw it, we saw you, we knew we were part of it, and it was hard.
Yes,
but it was not catastrophic.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I can imagine they are incredible people because of an experience like this. Such a hard thing, but I firmly believe there are gifts and lessons to be learned inside every circumstance like this.
Yes. And for us, it was our constant mindset that Robert was given to us. Again, there are no twins to my knowledge in my family. And so the fact that he snuck in there, to me, and a lot of it was on the worst days, I would say, yep, he was given to us.
Yeah, he was that bonus baby, that bonus blessing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Even on the hardest days, I tried as much as I could to go, no, I get to raise him.
Yes.
So,
we always love our babies. Always.
Yep. Always.
I want to move to the time closer to the end of Robert's life. And remember, Julie, you set the boundaries on how much of this you want to share. This is your story and Robert's story. If I understand the story right, you guys did not use hospice towards the end of Robert's life. And for my listeners, that's going to seem weird because obviously the show is about end-of-life care and hospice. But I think there are lessons for us to learn from caregivers and families that do not choose hospice, why they don't choose and under what circumstances they don't choose to use end-of-life care. So can you talk to me about Robert and how things were towards the end of his life?
Absolutely. And I will applaud you for allowing a different viewpoint, because I think some families will be or have been in the situation we were. It wasn't by necessary choice that Robert didn't have hospice. He'd been on palliative care for 10 years in our home because medically he was always almost waiting to pass, if that sounds gentle enough.
Right.
But 10 years on palliative care. So he started to get weaker around December of 2014. He was having many more seizures. His body started to swell some, but he could still, recognize all of us. The nursing was still there. And then January, towards the end of January, just started to do some odd things, different bodily movements. And so we took him to the hospital. He was in the hospital for about a week. And at that point, we knew he was different, is what I told my girlfriends when they asked me, so how is he? And I said, I can't describe it in any other way other than he's different. And I'd never used that term before. So as we were there in the hospital, of course, lots of, wonderful medical teams there with us, but they really couldn't do anything for him, Helen. I mean, he was changing every single day. And I didn't recognize necessarily that he was getting ready to pass away. I just knew he was different. Yeah. So by the time we were ready to leave, we were ready to take him home to our house. And the medical staff said, okay, we're going to discharge you. But we didn't discharge from the hospital as a palliative care family any longer. We were in this weird in between of, he's been on palliative care, maybe he should be on hospice, but no one was discussing hospice care with us. So even my husband as a physician says now, adamantly, and his neurologist says he should have gone home on hospice. However, I didn't know enough as the mom who's not medical at all that was the next step. I had no idea because I just kept thinking he's going to bounce back. He might not bounce back as strong like most families would have thought. So he came home much different, and the nurses, his home health was very aware that he was different. And they would say, Julie, he's not doing well today. And I knew what that meant. I didn't recognize what was happening, really. I just knew that I taught my students in my room in the house, the voice studio, and then I never left the house that week. I didn't realize that till after he passed. I knew something was different. Sometimes when you don't know, right? Right. And so I would spend every minute in between teaching in his bed with him, his enclosure bed, and I'd just get in the bed with him. So after a couple days, he just started getting more weak the night before Robert passed. And I'm going to tell your audience that this could be a trigger for them. And I'm going to say it as gently as I can. So forewarning, some things trigger some people more than others, but he had a really, really, really unusual, and I say really many times on purpose because it was such an unusual seizure. It was a slow moving from his feet all the way up to his body. And Victoria, his twin, again, alerted us and said, something's happening in Robert's room. We go into the room, and I'll make it as gentle as possible. He was desatting and he was seizing all over the place. So my husband, we did all the rescue medications, all the diastat, oxygen, and we're pulling him back. I didn't realize, I just kept watching the pulse ox machine and thinking, boy, that number is low. That's really low. It's going 70, 60, 50. And so I'm talking to Chris as he's doing rescue breathing with Robert. saying, this pulse ox machine must be broken. Something, he goes, never stopped what he was doing, because this is his job. He knows how to take care of someone who's about to pass. And so finally he says, I got him back. And here's me, standing next to Robert and my husband, Chris, thinking, what do you mean you got him back? What does that mean? I'm watching pulse ox. I know things are not going well. And then I realized what he means. He got him back from where he was headed. He was not going to make it through that seizure. So we decided, and we both knew, someone's going to spend the night with him. I'm going to be in his bed with him all night. I did that. Chris went to work the next morning, and both of us knew something again was on a different journey. So when his nurse came in the next morning, I was in the kitchen with her preparing his meds, just a couple steps away from his room. And we're preparing meds, and I'm telling her about the night before, and then we need to be watching for this and blah, blah, blah. And we hear this noise in his room, and we go in his room, and he's doing the exact same seizure he did the night before. Now, mind you, I've been watching his seizures for 18 years, and I've never seen a seizure like this. It wasn't animated. It wasn't what we typically say a tonic-clonic seizure was, or a generalized seizures. It was quiet, and it just moved. And so we both did everything Chris had done the night before. And we did the diastat, all the rescue meds, all the things, all the oxygen. And as I'm holding him, and his nurse, who I absolutely have the greatest respect for, I'm holding him, and he breathes his last breath. And I'm thinking, that pulse ox machine is not working again. That can't be the right number. I'm thinking, no, just me and my glass half full and my, superwoman, Kate, this cannot be what's happening in my arms. And if I can just give you a little bit more of the story without in any way being dramatic, she says, Julie, you need to call Chris. And I'm holding Robert. And I said, why? This is how things were so slow motion to me. I guess I could say it like that. I was like watching a movie. She said, because he's not breathing and doesn't have a pulse. I was so much in the rescue mode, I didn't even get that. I mean, I didn't have the ability, I don't think, to receive it in that moment. I surely didn't have enough experience in anything like that. Chris is an ICU doctor. He deals with death every day. I've never been through this. So I'm totally in denial while I'm holding him, Helen. And so immediately, I do what she says. I call Chris. He comes, the ambulance comes, everybody comes. This is the thing that was different for our family. Robert had been, in the place we knew from a very early age in his teenage years that the DNR needed to be in the room, because we all knew that we did not want to do complete rescue. We didn't ever want him intubated, to prolong life. But I did not calculate that he wasn't on hospice. He was still on palliative care. So all the things that I had to do, calling the ambulance, calling the sheriff, they call the sheriff, they call the fire truck, everybody was involved. Whereas if he'd been on hospice, it would have been a much quieter, gentle passage in his room, because he was on hospice. The thing I want to say is we did not have that experience with Robert, a quietness in his room when he passed that I think perhaps most people who have hospice do have. But I also want to say that that's the way Robert passed. There was no foretelling of that. There was no planning in the moment like that. He should have gone home on hospice care. Absolutely. We all knew that in hindsight. Everybody knew that. So the thing I regret with our kids, you asked me how our kids changed, how did it change the dynamic? They did not get to come home and say goodbye to him. Even Victoria, who was upstairs in the house, did not get downstairs in time. So that's the thing I regret. And I'll carry that to my grave, knowing there's nothing I can do about it, but that would have been the blessing of hospice. The other side I say to that is, if he had been on hospice, I might not have been the only one in the room with the nurse who got to hold him. So for me, it's a little bit selfish in saying I got to hold him as he breathed his last breath. If Chris had been home, he as the physician and the nurse as the caregiver also would have huddled around Robert. I would have been in the corner as the mom, not as holding him. So there's this mixed feeling of, yeah, he should have been home on hospice, but then the whole room would have been with the kids and Chris. And I, as the mom, cherished that moment as the most precious moment in my life. I got to give birth to Robert, and then I held him as he left this earth. Are you kidding me? I don't want to change that. But yes, for our kids, that would have been the blessing. They could have all come in and said goodbye. They didn't get that. And that's what the part I do regret. So we didn't get to choose. And I know for some of your listeners, that also might be the case with them, that you do all the planning. I mean, I'd planned his funeral. It had been ready to go for 10 years. I'd planned everything just for that day. But not leaving the hospital as a hospice patient could also be a situation one of your listeners finds himself in. And I think you have to kind of look at both and go, yeah, there was a good and bad in that. And this is life. You know, we get to choose a lot of things, but we might not get to choose that last moment. And so if we don't, like in my case, it's a thing you consider about what were the things that really were positive when it happened. And the biggest for me, that I got to hold him and see him pass from this life. And it was a beautiful thing. And I still count that as a blessing that he didn't have hospice care, because I wouldn't have gotten to do that, I don't think. So yeah, I am totally for hospice care. And if I had planned it, you know, me thinking I'm so smart, and I would have planned everything down to the, you know, the very moment, like I would usually try to do about everything. It's my problem. I would have planned hospice, but I didn't get hospice. But I got that last moment with Robert, and I'll never forget it.
We always say it's a good interview if somebody cries. So this is my turn. My turn. When I counsel families, when they're trying to look at how they've managed care, you know, they talk about the regrets or the mistakes that they think that they've made. What I always say is, you made the right decision in the moment with the information that you had. You could not make a wrong decision if you make it in the best interest of the person that you love, your beloved.
Perfect advice.
So having you on the show for me was never about, okay, here's Juli Henderson. We need to tell you she's a cautionary tale because they didn't choose hospice for their son, and then look what happened. That was never my intention. Our goal, what we really want listeners to know, is that you made your choices as Robert's advocate, you and Chris did. You did everything right for him because the decisions were made out of love and caring and advocacy, and always in his best interest. And whether hospice was there or not, there were gifts and lessons inside your experience. Yes. And as a mother, I will tell you that I totally 100% get this feeling that you have of, this was my child. I gave birth to him, and I was there when he left.
Yep.
It was not diluted. There weren't a lot of other people around. It was just you.
Thank you for that. So many thoughts when I say I get the privilege of talking about Robert's life. That's the thing at the forefront for me. Yes. Was it hard raising him? Yes. Was it devastating some days? Yes. Was it lonely and isolating? All the words we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, all of that. But in the end, when he passed, was his passing the best it could be? Because, like you said, you were an advocate for his whole life and you were his caregiver. Did that end for Robert in the most beloved way it could have ended? And the answer is yes. I mean, there is nothing else that could have given him more complete passage than his nurse. And because I give her credit for being in the room. We were a team. It couldn't have been for me as the mom, like you said, a more precious moment.
Yeah.
And I don't justify that anymore because I know that everybody would have loved to have been there. All of our kids, and I don't blame them, and my husband rushing from the hospital. But for me, I take that as honestly a gift from God for me that I got to have him in my arms when that happened. Yeah, it's pretty special. Yeah, pretty special. That's the only words I have to say.
And what a wonderful memory and a legacy. So this is Robert's legacy.
Absolutely.
Fierce, loving advocacy of the mom. I think anybody listening who has a child will know that a parent's, what I call the mama bear mentality.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't beat it. There's nothing stronger than that.
No, and sometimes our horn.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes we let our behinds hang out. Sometimes it is not pretty. But, oh, man.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah.
So,
what we call mama bears. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly why they do it. Yes. The claws come out.
That's right.
If you could go back and give your younger caregiving self, when Robert was about 2 years old, when you guys started all of this with him, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
I think it'd be two things. First is get over yourself because, I say if you're a strong woman, you have a hard time getting over yourself sometimes. Like, yeah, I can do all that. Of course I could. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course we can.
And if someone had asked me, before, because I always loved the idea, even though I didn't do it, of doing music therapy, so I could actually be with special needs kids or kids with disabilities. I use those words interchangeably, by the way, so that I could be a part of their lives with music. But if you'd asked me, was I ready to be a mom of Robert? I was like, sure, yeah, of course, absolutely, I could do that. Yeah, wrong. I need to get over myself that I need a lot of people around me. And I think the second thing would be the most important words that I heard in the beginning were from my mom's good friend who raised a daughter who has disabilities. And she said, the only advice she gave me, because my mom asked her, it was, tell Julie to pace herself. And when I heard that early on, 2.5, 3, 4 years old, I was like, well, of course I'd pace myself. It's going to be short because, he's so critical that I wasn't even thinking teenage years. They were telling me, no, he's probably not getting that to that age. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, well, that's great advice, but either he's going to grow out of it or, sadly, and I don't say this flippantly, that he would not be with us long. So pacing yourself, I didn't really know what that meant. Pacing yourself in what way? And now I give that advice. I really give that advice to anyone who's a caregiver. If it looks like it's going to go longer than you think, then that pace yourself statement is really important because you can wear yourself out as the caregiver and not then be able to care for your loved one. So you need to take care of yourself. You need to pay attention when you're dipping emotionally and you're depressed. You need to reach out and have people around you. You need to make people aware that you're going to be lonely and that you're going to need someone to ask you to lunch. You're going to need someone to actually show up at your house, maybe with some coffee. You're going to need people because the road can be much, much longer than you anticipate. And I didn't know that when she said it, but when I realized it was going to be years and years and years that I would have the privilege of caring for Robert, I needed to also take care of myself and be aware of my own needs also. And that could mean just go take a nap for 20 minutes while the nurse is there, rather than trying to do the dishes, Yeah. Simple things sometimes.
For a lot of caregivers, that experience is a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm. For most.
Yeah, yes. And it's so hard to see it because I think, at least for a lot of people who are caring for older adults, that slide into the caregiving experience doesn't start with a seizure. It starts with mom's having trouble with her phone, or dad forgets to pay a bill, or things are very gradual. And not all of a sudden you realize I spend, half my weekday evenings at my parents' house.
Yes.
Yes.
It's very real.
Yes.
It's very real.
And all of a sudden you realize that label, that name, you're a caregiver. Maybe you didn't take it on for yourself, but all of a sudden there it is for you.
Yeah. No, it's real. And, I'm of the age that, a lot of people are doing both, if they have a special needs child or someone, your loved one you're caring for that's younger than your parents, you might be doing both. And you being in the middle is a place where you need to find yourself and you need to evaluate, I'll say, get over myself, that life is not about me necessarily. It is about me, but it's about, who I'm caring for. But you have to pay attention to the signs. It's a hard place. I'm so glad now that we talk about it so much more openly than we did years ago, because a lot more of us are caring for our parents.
Yes.
So,
and they're sandwich caregivers is what they are, caring for kids and then the generation above them as well. It's an interesting situation to be in, and the isolation is incredible, and yet there are so many people doing it. Your story is really, really powerful, Juli, and the fact that you are so willing to share it is amazing. How can my listeners connect with you, read your blog, see the work that you're doing?
In Our Arms blog. They can find me on Instagram and on Facebook. We also have a Facebook community group called In Our Arms Community Group. And you can join there. We have over 500 people in that group, family members, physicians, therapists, teachers, and we talk to each other about the hard things and try to encourage each other. And then the blog right now is on a pause with me writing weekly. I do post, but not writing weekly, because we are in the process of finishing up a book that I hope it comes out in 2024. But again, it's Robert's story, and hopefully helping another family with the raw conversations and the things that people don't talk about and the hardships that we went through as a family in caring for Robert, but also the joys of it.
Juli, so many people are going to benefit from your book and from knowing what your family did and the way things turned out for you. Such important and valuable lessons. Thank you for being so willing to be open and authentic, and the vulnerability that you show is just amazing. Thank you so much for introducing me to Robert.
Well, Helen, thank you for having me. I did not expect to go to tears, but that's Robert's legacy. We tell his story, and I get the privilege of sharing his story. So thank you for letting me be that vulnerable and sharing the story. Hopefully it helps the next family.
You can connect with Juli's blog at inourarms.blog. Her website has information about her and about Chris, her husband, and about Robert, as well as many resources for caregiving and for children with special needs. So check out inourarms.blog. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.